Okay, just a couple of quick words to follow up from the Section 1031 discussion that we had in class, otherwise known as like-kind, otherwise known as like-kind exchanges. I just wanted to make sure that a couple points aren't lost in translation. Number one, these are tax deferral techniques. They are not tax savings necessarily, but tax deferral. Because at the date of the exchange, there is no tax paid. But, and we did this, not as much in this class, but we did do it at one point, that when you have a non-tax event, it means no change in basis. Remember, I just said that's the Becker way of learning this particular concept. And since there's no change in basis, and the real wording we call this is carryover basis, and it works like this. Let's say your tax basis in a property is, let's just for argument's sake make up some numbers. Let's say your tax basis is $500. It's worth, this is the ATCB, adjusted tax cost basis, and its fair market value is, let's just say $1,000. So normally you would have a $500 gain if you sold it, but instead what you do is you exchange it for a property with the same fair market value, $1,000. So you get $1,000 of value, the other party gets $1,000 of value because they get your property. All is doing well in terms of the exchange, and of course it never works that simple, but just for argument's sake. And so now, in the new property, your basis is following the rule. If it's no tax, no change, no tax, no change, so your basis in the new property that you now own is, you guessed it, $500, no change. That's the carryover basis. Boink. It goes from here to here. That way, if you sell this later on, it preserves the fact that you really have a $500 gain. So you don't ever escape the gain necessarily. Of course, if you die, the heirs get the step-up basis to fair market value, and the gain goes away there, and that's part of the deal. That's all part of the idea of deferring the tax until the guy dies or the owner dies. We don't wish him to die too soon, but this is part of what goes on in the thinking and the minds and processes of tax planning someone's financial life. Now, this is all well and good, and it is, but in order to effectuate the exchange, the property has to be like-kind property. And when it comes to real property, we learned that the definition of like-kind property is very broad. A lot of things fall into it. Investment properties, and these are called Section 1250 properties, and that we discuss. So if you're not sure what I mean by that, look that up. It's important that you know what the definition of Section 1250 properties are. So this could include investment properties, commercial buildings for rental, factories, let's make that better, factories. It could include rental properties, that's residential rental. And all of these are all considered like-kind exchange. Even raw land could be included. They would all be one category. So you could be exchanging for any numbers of these. You could exchange this for this, you could exchange this for this, and this for that, and it just goes on. You can combine all these different properties into various scenarios where you're using them for like-kind exchanges, and it all works. Now, the key is that it is not a personal property. Not personal, meaning that you're using it for your own use. we don't mean personal in terms of, it's not, I'm not referring to tangible personal property. I'm referring to the fact that do not mean tangible. What we mean when we say the word personal here means you're using it personally. It's not being used as an investment. It's not being used. It's being used as your own personal residence. So that doesn't qualify for like-kind exchange. Now the key is, well, is it personal or is it not personal? At the it's the determination of whether the exchange meets the definition of like-kind exchange depends on the nature of the property at the time or the day of the nature of the property at the day of the exchange. That's the key. What happens the next day almost doesn't matter, but we wouldn't take that risk. We would always want the property to stay as investment or stay as commercial or to stay in the category. You don't have to swap land for land. You can swap any number of the combinations that I showed you in this circle here. You can exchange any number of these for the other kind that's in the circle, and it'll all be under the like-kind exchange, and that's great. But the key is, let's say, do we know it's an investment property? How do we know it's an investment property? Maybe the person intended to use it for their personal residence. So the key is, what's the nature of the property the day of the exchange? That's why that rule of later on converting it to personal use worked in that IRS ruling. What the ruling is basically saying that if in 2 years it becomes personal use, that's so far enough removed from the day of the exchange that they're giving up any hope of saying the day of the exchange it was not investment or not rental or not used in some way other than personal. Let me say that again. After 2 years, the IRS is acknowledging that if it's still used as a investment or rental or anything that qualifies for the exchange and the person's not using it personally, then they'll assume that that really was the mindset at the date of the exchange. So that's your safe harbor. After 2 years, but that also means that after 2 years you can convert. This is what the story we talked about, or with the planning we talked about that we're doing with clients, convert to personal use at the end of the 2 years, and the IRS will not challenge it. And that's the key to the idea of it'll eventually become a retirement home for these guys in the real estate business. They wait 2 years, they don't have to rent it out in the meantime, although they have to try, they don't have to be successful, and then in 2 years it becomes personal. And that's not considered a tax event. Now if it's sold, that'll be a tax event, and there may be tax there. In fact, the neat thing about this deferral is it allows more people to avail themselves of other planning opportunities in the future because of the power of deferral that we've mentioned before. And that's the key. Now one last thing, which is just sort of a word of warning, and I guess it's fair game for a little quiz if I felt so inclined, which is, in order to make the Section 1031 exchange work, you got to make sure of one thing, and that is that cash never touches the hands of the seller. Never touches the seller. If the seller gets cash in hand, then you, of any amount, you could not blow the whole thing, but you could certainly cause some tax to be paid. So that's why we use what we described in class. That's why we use this QI, or qualified intermediary, or also known as an exchange agent to make sure the cash doesn't touch the buyer's hands, because the exchange agent will handle any cash and hold it until it's able to be released to the rightful owner. Okay, that's what I want to say. Hopefully that whets your appetite to one day learn more about it in your respective careers. If you have any questions, you know what to do. Send me an email at gmail, and I'll respond accordingly.